I mean, I grew up a bad kid, so why not continue being bad? But yeah, I just did that, and I was like, and I was talking to Ruben, and he was, well, what do you call this thing? And I was like, I don't know, I want it to be like a changeup, but it's a splitter. So I was like, why don't I just call it a chitter, or something like that. And I was like, imagine, like, what would you call a knuckleball that cuts? I don't want to get to that, but.
Test coming back clean. I'm not really concerned with where the nerves are right now.
So you fully expect to pitch again?
Oh, wait. Oh, God, yeah. Clown question, bro.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where and what time you're watching this. Welcome to Marty Time TV. I'm Marty Caswell. We are brought to you by the all-new Hamul Casino Resort, the Players Place. I am delighted to welcome, for the first time on this channel, one of my favorite all-time guests in all my years of doing radio, and that would be the excellent Keith Law. Padres fans, you guys know him from The Athletic, always talking about prospects and trades and whatnot. He's been a go-to for myself and my former colleague Darren Smith for all these years. And I'm so happy to have him on the show. Keith Law, how are you today on this lovely Friday in June?
I am good, thank you. It is a lovely day here in Delaware. What is it like out your way?
It's cloudy. We've had sprinkles for the past couple of days. It's been doom and gloom. Padre fans are feeling the doom and gloom because they lost the last two games with the Giants, and people are wondering what's happening with the offense, and no one knows with the pitching staff. So it's a little bit gloomy. But by Monday, when the Dodgers, which that series we've been eyeballing since the schedule came out, when they get here, it's going to be perfect and 70, and we'll be back to normal. Life will be good.
Awesome.
Well, thank you for joining me today. I wanted to bring you on first and foremost. I know you wrote a couple of days ago about you re-ranked the top 50 prospects in baseball. And if you're a Padres fan, that's important because we know the Padres, they need to add pieces, not one piece, maybe two pieces, maybe three pieces, but it's more about what do they have left in their farm system? They seem to have depleted it the past couple of years, starting with the Juan Soto trade, and then and then of course getting Dylan Cease. So I do want to get there, but before I do, when the Padres signed Xander Bogaerts years ago, I know you're one of those that contract is not going to age well. As it stands right now, I'm not sure if he'll play tonight. He has a shoulder injury. The Padres have 8 years left on Bogaerts' $280 million contract. Keith, you did not think it was a good idea then. Did you expect it to age as poorly and as quickly as it has so far in 3 years?
No, I thought he was already showing signs of decline when they signed him. And what he did in the first year with San Diego, kind of figured we'd see about that for a couple of years, and then it would just drop maybe quickly. He was just not somebody I wanted to invest in for the long term. But if the Padres had signed him to, say, a 3-year deal, I would have said, fine, totally fine. Not really a player they needed. I just didn't think he fit their roster at that point anyway, because it was pretty clear he couldn't play shortstop. But I wouldn't have expected him to implode to the extent, with the speed with which he has imploded, particularly just the death of his power, that there's just so little left there. And I mean, it's not dissimilar to the Hosmer contract, where they're going to end up having to just move on and accept, it's a lot of money for them to accept just giving up on. But that's where this is going to go. He's going to get to a point before this contract is up, maybe before it's half up, where he's not even worth the roster spot anymore.
What's his best defensive position at this point? I know he wasn't happy last year. I mean, he talked about getting up to that slow start after he was moved to second base. It was a lot for him. He's a very mental player, right? When things aren't going defensively, it seems to translate to the offense. But at this point, with whatever time they have left in Xander Bogaerts, where do you play him? I
mean, I know they've kind of moved him. They've tried multiple positions since they got him. He's played mostly shortstop this year. Metrics in a small sample this year. I usually look at Baseball Savant's outs above average or runs above average. I think that's by far the best available defensive metric we have on the public side, and actually says he's been fine. I don't think that's going to hold up. It certainly doesn't pass the eye test. It's also not consistent with his history at the position. I think probably second base, but the problem they have is they don't really have an ideal person to play shortstop. And as much as I like Leo De Vries, and we're going to talk about him at some point,
yes, we are.
Be up tomorrow, right? It's going to be time before it's going to take some time before he's there. And so, do they keep running Bogaerts out there, even though probably over the course of a full season he'll turn out to be a below average defensive shortstop? It's certainly what I expect. he's just slowed down. I mean, that's really the bottom line. I just don't think he has the kind of lateral range that he used to have. He's good at second base. Actually, the numbers last year really supported him continuing to play second base. And I think that would be ideal. If they had somebody better to handle shortstop, that would be the ideal thing to do with Bogaerts.
$280 million contract. Keith, let me go ahead and to the listeners and the viewers. I want to apologize for all the noise, all the banging you're hearing in the background. I've had construction workers in my place for, it's going to be like 2 weeks. They found a little bit of mold here in Pacific Beach, right? When there's mold, look out. They removed an entire ceiling and 2 walls. So it's been nonstop banging here. So I apologize for all the noise. Okay, the Bogaerts thing is interesting because the Padres did not pay him for the back end of that contract. They paid him because they were in win now mode. They were going to go for it with Manny Machado, who's 32 years old, who by the way, he's been productive. Career home run 350 yesterday. Manny's helping to carry this offense, right? They have Tatis signed. They bring in Michael King. They bring in Dylan Cease. Everything for the Padres right now is about winning now. So Keith Law, I'm going to make you GM, president of baseball ops for the day. How aggressive are you at the trade deadline if you're AJ Preller, knowing the holes you have on your roster, but also knowing the age of some of these contracts?
I'd be aggressive with the understanding they don't have a lot to work with in the farm systems. They're not going to be able to go and make the large acquisition unless they're able to do it with money. And I don't know that that's really going to happen. Obviously, this ownership group, all we heard all winter was that they needed to shave payroll,
right?
To add to the payroll. Because I look at this system, and you mentioned at the top, they have really depleted it through trades, through promotions, and also through guys not really panning out as well. So their farm system is essentially for me, it's the big two, and then a lot of guys who are in low A or in the complex who might turn out to be really good prospects, but they're just not going to have a lot of trade value right now. Teams scout those levels. They often scout those levels more than they scout AAA, AA, because that's where a lot of trades come from. Those
Hang on for 1 second, Keith.
You have some prospects at the lower levels, and that's the other teams scout those lower levels, right? Because that's typically where traded prospects come from. You don't see a lot of prospects who are banging on the door of the big leagues who get traded. And in the Padres case, maybe some of those guys would be included in a trade, but they are so far from the majors and not even really established yet as prospects that I don't think they're going to have significant value. So if, a Sandy Alcantara, for example, were to become available, or he's probably going to be one of the better starting pitchers available in trade at least. Could the Padres match an offer from any of the other likely contenders? No, they're going to get outbid on prospects. Even though Preller is often willing to be super aggressive in these trades, they just don't have the parts anymore like they did even a year or so ago, and never mind 3 or 4 years ago, where it's just there's not a lot left, and it's going to take probably, I'd say 2 years from now before you can see this farm system back at a point where they have the prospect capital to be able to make those trades again.
You just recently wrote about the top 50. You had, I think, the highest rated prospect for the Padres was De Vries at 10. Ethan Salas is 17. I was a little bit surprised by Salas, just given the injury and just his trajectory in the minors. Let's start with De Vries. What have you noticed about him, the way he's evolved since last season?
All the reports I've gotten from scouts so far this year have been raving. This kid can absolutely break. There's very low level of concern about the hit tool now going forward, especially because it's the hardest thing to predict with any position player prospect. It really comes down to, we can figure out a lot of things. We can determine if they have power. We can certainly measure speed. We're better at defense, at least in terms of can this guy stay at this particular position, but it is hard to figure out who's going to hit. And particularly because Major League pitching is just so good right now. Even guys who hit all the way up and then they get to the majors and it's like they just hit a wall almost immediately. De Vries is one of the few prospects around the minors where people just tell me that he can hit. He's going to hit. And right now, people are saying it's a shortstop. He's going to stay at shortstop. I've seen little bits of him. He was in Fall League last year. He was really young to be there. Don't read too much into it. And when a guy is super, super young for the Fall League and looks okay, to me, that's good enough, right? You didn't look out of place. You didn't look totally overmatched. You're fine. In his case, he's the one guy where if they said, we'll trade De Vries, you could probably get just about anybody in the trade market. That might be too much. I mean, I understand they want to win now. I get it, but man, that is a if I'm saying a guy's a top 10 prospect in all of baseball, you better be getting the sun and the moon back in return for him. And I think De Vries is probably the one guy in their system I would say I would actually hold on to him, because he has a chance to be that kind of franchise player, the guy who cost you $300 million when you want to go out and get him in free agency. You've got exactly one of those guys in your system right now. I would have a hard time giving him up.
So if you're the Padres and you need a left fielder right now, because Gavin Sheets, man, you want to keep him alive, and he's not a left fielder, although the effort is there. The Jason Henry experiment, I would imagine that's coming to an end rather soon, and they don't have options in the farm system. So if the Red Sox said, all right, we're going to go ahead and give you, I know your colleague Dennis Lynn wrote about the Padres' interest in Sox outfielder Jarren Duran. You say no for De Vries, that absolutely not, correct? No chance.
Yes, I wouldn't do that deal, but I also think if they don't put De Vries in, I don't know if the Red Sox are trading Duran anyway.
Okay.
But I also think if they were to, there's no way I could put together a compelling offer from the Padres without including De Vries. Even if you just go 2, 3, 4, 5, right down the rest of their system, I don't think that's going to move the needle enough for the Red Sox.
A couple of years ago, I thought there was zero chance that AJ Preller would ever trade his son, Mackenzie Gore. And the guy he gleamed when he would shine, that smile when he talked about Mackenzie Gore. And then he did, right? That was the one that's going to be the one day it's going to be a very unpopular trade. Robert Hassel, Abrams, Gore, James Wood. By the way, Mackenzie Gore is showing it's just everything I think Preller thought he was going to be. And now you're saying about De Vries. I thought Ethan Salas was going to be that guy. Now I kind of wonder exactly what he is. Who is Ethan Salas at this point? And of course, he's injured now, the back injury, which is you never want to hear.
Yeah, well, that's the number one problem is he's hurt, right? To me, that is why did I leave him at 17 on my list? Because we just don't have a lot of new info this year. He played about 2, maybe 3 weeks, and then he got hurt. And he's had some injury trouble. So I'm kind of in a holding pattern, right? He just turned 19 on Sunday, and he hasn't produced, but he shouldn't be in AA. He probably shouldn't have been in high A when he got to high. They have mishandled him. They flat out mishandled this guy. And I haven't said that a lot about the Padres over the years, but I think that they've messed this one up, and I hope it doesn't impact him in the long term. Now people across the industry are saying, well, he's kind of a disappointment. He doesn't hit the ball that hard. At some point you have to produce. Yeah. He's also younger than some of the guys coming out of high school in this draft who, if they play at all this year, they're probably just going to play in that pretend bridge league they do. No high school player for this draft is going to go to AA, and that's where Salas is. He doesn't belong there. He wasn't physically ready for AA, and he wasn't ready in terms of his approach at the plate. They have been moving him aggressively because they will catch and throw. Fine. I agree. He is going to catch in the big leagues. Nobody questions this. And the defensive skills are perfect for his age. And I think they were also just trying to show this is our prize guy now. Let's move him aggressive. Let's keep moving him up. Let's get him with some of the better arms there. It hasn't worked. And I actually think it's a very, very rare case where I would be fine with sending a prospect back down. I have been talking about this a lot recently, more in the context of major league players. Teams call prospects up to the majors. Oh, he's bad for 2 weeks, send him back down. So 2 weeks is not enough for any of these guys. If your plan was to send him back down after 2 weeks, that's a bad plan. Don't call him up in the first place. In Salas's case, with the long layoff he's going to have for the injury, when he comes back, send him an A-ball. And leave him there. Let him go somewhere long enough to have some success. Because I haven't given up on the pure ability, but being super young for your level only takes you so far. And I think I've remained one of the higher people on Salas because I see the long-term potential, but I also agree at some point you have to produce. And while I will argue till I'm blue in the face that it's not his fault that he's been put in these situations, at some point you're going to have to hit. We can't hand wave it away forever.
Speaking of catchers, the catchers that had a high expectation, Luis Campusano is a little bit interesting when you're talking about how Padres use different guys. Now, the Padres brought him up now. I mean, the Padres, they're not getting production from their catchers, from Diaz. Maldonado has been absolutely terrible. And Luis Campusano is not going to get a sniff behind the plate. They want to see what he could do, in the DH role. They needed a bat. Are you surprised that Campusano has just not developed offensively?
Yes. I thought he'd hit. There were always some questions about him defensively, and God, I just looked it up. He does not have a hit this year. That's pretty bad, actually. He showed flashes of it in a small sample in 23, and I thought, all right, this is great. Now he's going to get more playing time, and he'll start to show. He's always been a guy who hit the ball hard. The swing was good. He was a good enough athlete. He was aggressive. He wasn't going to walk a lot, but you were okay with it because he made a ton of contact when he did swing the bat. This all looked good, and then he kind of fell apart last year. I think part of it was some of his flaws got exposed. Part of it also, I think, was they were messing with the playing time because they don't like the catching. They really didn't like the framing. I think I'm going off memory here. He's kind of rated out as one of the worst pitch framers, which I understand that matters. I also think that's the worst way to evaluate a catcher. And especially if going forward, we're going to have some kind of automated system or a challenge system. This framing stuff is going to go away, and we're going to get back to the sort of nuts and bolts of catching. What reason is, like, he just needs to play. And if they're going to DH him and say, that's it, stop worrying about defense, just go hit. You know what? Great. That might be exactly what he needs. He is definitely one of the more mystifying prospects of the last 5 years in terms of guys I really thought would hit. Yeah. And who other scouts did too. It's not just me, who has flat out not hit in the big leagues at all.
I want Padres fans to feel a little bit better right now, so I'm going to make it just more positive when it comes to some prospects that have mashed. And that one guy is Jackson Merrill. I know we had that conversation when the Padres promoted him last year out of spring training, right, against the Dodgers, and they moved to positions. They moved him from shortstop to center field. I know you're like, maybe shortstop's better, much more value. Any surprises at all what Jackson Merrill did in his first year, and what are you seeing from him in season 2?
I'm shocked. I was really pessimistic about Merrill being able to make the jump to hit big league pitching while also changing positions. That's just a lot to ask any player. It's not a knock on Merrill specifically. Yeah. We talked about with the Red Sox bringing up Christian Campbell. There's talk about, they're going to bring up Marcelo Mayer, and then they're going to have him change positions, which I think ultimately they didn't do. But that is so much to ask of a player, particularly moving infield to outfield. I mean, this is not even just, your shortstop will slide you over to second, which I think is a lot. That is not a minor change. That's easier than moving from the infield to the outfield. And for Merrill to do that when he didn't have a ton of minor league experience anyway, and I thought the approach was, I thought he was going to struggle more than he did, just in terms of making contact, recognizing pitches. Like I said earlier, major league pitchers they're wizards. They stuff they can do with baseball is unbelievable. It is really, really hard to make that jump. So what he's been able to do in such a short period of time is incredibly impressive. It speaks to the athlete. I think it speaks to the great job the Padres did scouting him in the first place. They evaluated him right. They were ahead of everybody else on that one, and they do deserve credit for handling him correctly from the start.
Yeah, he's wired correctly. I'm not sure if you had a chance to talk to him, but if you do, man, I haven't covered many. I think just from 22. I haven't covered many 22-year-olds that are wired quite like him. So he's been a fun one to go ahead and watch. I know you've been a very, very busy man. The MLB draft is just a little over a month from today. Anything that's really jumped out at you as you were scouting and talking to different GMs and players and scouts?
So I would say two things. One, there's no consensus 1-1 at all. The Nationals pick first. They are still looking at least a half a dozen candidates for that spot. Just nobody has emerged as the head of the pack. The second thing is it is an extremely college-heavy draft up top. And very light on particularly high school pitching, which is fine. It's the category I kind of like the least in the first round because they're just so high risk. But I think what you're going to see in the first round this year is a lot of college players, a lot of high school guys up the middle, a lot of high school shortstops are going to fly off the board. You will probably see relatively few high school pitchers, relatively few college right-handers. Very interesting in the college crop this year. It's extremely left-handed. Obviously, we value those guys more to begin with, but the right-handed group just kind of hasn't emerged. And I saw more players for the draft this year than I ever have in any year in my career. And most Fridays it was like lefty, 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 which is fine. I go see the guy. They are who they are. I've just been very surprised how few of the Friday night starters of note in college baseball this year have been right-handed.
You said a lot of college shortstops in this year's draft. That's what's standing in at you. So the first person I thought of was AJ Preller, because as we know, we've talked about these guys. He loves himself some shortstop. So hopefully he can figure out a way to go ahead and build up the system, because it's been depleted. It's been depleted because the Padres are in a win mode now. We can look at the Nationals, and man, that series is going to That's gonna hurt. I saw Robert Hassel make his debut, hit a home run, couple of hits, 3-hit game. I'm like, oh boy, here we go.
We always joke the Padres, they're going to take a high school pitcher in the first round. Obviously, they did last year. They do that a lot.
Yeah,
this ain't the year for it. The second round, sure, do it all day long. I wouldn't force it this year. There are plenty of high school shorts. I mean, it's actually a pretty deep high school shortstop class, and it's weak, kind of a lot of the other high school stuff. But that guy, they want the athletic guy. They want the guy who starts at shortstop, because if he has to move, he's probably going to be pretty good at any other position you move the guy to.
Okay.
There are plenty of those candidates in this draft, and they'll find their guy. The Padres do it a little differently, and I think their track record's pretty good. This would be the 1 year I would say ixnay on the high school it's your pay, because it's just, don't force it. That guy isn't there at the year.
I'll make sure I mention that to AJ Preller. I know he's a big fan of your work. I'm a huge fan of your work, Keith Law. You're the absolute best. Before I let you go, and thank you so much for your time. Again, outstanding writer on The Athletic. You can find him on Blue Sky. I put it somewhere. Blue Sky is just easier, man. It's just, we don't need stress in our lives, right? Blue Sky is nice and peaceful. I know you can find Darren Smith on there as well. There's Keith Law's Blue Sky address if you guys want to find him. Any surprises now? Anything that's jumped out at you about this baseball season? Anything at all?
I know they're on a little bit of a roll right now. I didn't think the Orioles would be this bad, mostly because I didn't think they'd have trouble scoring runs. I didn't think the pitching would be very good. It's been much worse. I actually think they've allowed more runs than any team except the Athletics in the American League. And of course, the Athletics play in a minor league park that's very hitter friendly too. But the Orioles aren't scoring runs. That probably, for me, more than anything else, is the biggest surprise of the season to date.
Okay.
Just scrolling through the standings here, that's kind of the one thing that's jumped out. Even teams I thought would be good. I thought Atlanta would be better, but then they lost Ronaldo Lopez and they lost Jurickson Profar.
Yeah.
And then, they're just not fielding the same kind of team here. Other clubs that are struggling, the Red Sox, they outscored their opponents. I still think they're a pretty good team underneath the hood. They're just not playing up to their capabilities. Some stuff like that tends to even out over the course of the season. But Orioles being as bad as they are, the Tigers are surprising. The Tigers have been better than expected. I thought they'd be good. They're playing pretty great. And, even if they could be a 500 team the rest of the season, then they're still going to make the playoffs. So many teams get into the playoffs now. A good start like this goes a very long way. And I think they're better than a 500 team the rest of the season. I'd be very curious to see what they do at the deadline, because their farm system has really been on the ascendant, with former Padres scouting director Mark Connor making the picks there. And he's done a great job since he started as the Tiger scouting director.
If I had told you in spring training that the Padres would lose Jackson Merrill to injury, be that Michael King, wouldn't have Yu Darvish at all. Dylan Cease is not showing Cy Young form, but they're 35-26, and right there with the Dodgers. Would you at all be surprised by that? I mean, I'm looking at the rotation for this weekend versus the Brewers. Brewers are a good team. Lenny Vasquez, Stephen Kolek, Ryan Berger. That's what you're doing when you're the Padres. I don't know how they're doing this. Kind of patchwork.
Nope. I would have thought that's a sub 500 team and they're going to be sellers. And I guess that's still possible, but they have not only, they're 9 games over 500. They have outscored their opponents. If they just get healthy, there's no reason they can't end up in the playoffs. And without even making an addition, I understand they have flaws. They have things they absolutely need to address. But they could get into the playoffs just by getting healthy. That might be good enough in a team, because the problem is the bad teams in baseball are horrendous. Like, there's just a lot of really, really bad teams. And even some of the teams that are kind of on the bubble, like Arizona, look, Corbin Burns has to have Tommy John surgery.
Done.
Arizona team looks a lot worse all of a sudden. And maybe they're just going to say, we're not going to compete this year. They sell off a player or two and try to come back and do it again next year. Obviously, something like that would really help the Padres in the end. So you just have to kind of be above the median in your league. That's almost enough to put you in the playoffs at this point, because you will beat up a lot on the really bad clubs.
Keith Law, you're the absolute best. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you. Love reading your work, and I really enjoyed this conversation. So thanks again. Have a wonderful weekend. Hopefully, if you make it to San Diego, man, we'll owe you a bunch of fish tacos.
Oh,
gotta happen. You gotta get down here.
Yeah. You know, I come out there to eat and maybe watch baseball.
Two great things. Thanks, Keith. Have a great day.
Yep, my pleasure.
Well, that was a fun conversation with the Athletics' Keith Law, one of my favorite guests, one of my favorite reads. And I'm telling you, some of you longtime Padres fans or sports fans or San Diegans will know this, but he sounds just like Lee Jenkins. Lee Jenkins, as you guys know, used to work for Sports Illustrated, big Padres fan, big San Diegan. He is now with the Clippers. But thank you again to Keith Law, talking about Xander Bogaerts' contract. When the Padres signed Xander Bogaerts to 8 years, $280 million, when the first person that we had on the show, on Darren's show, was Keith Law. And he said, this is not a good deal. But as you heard from Keith earlier in the show, he did not expect Xander Bogaerts to age as poorly as it had, and says, listen, they're going to have to just walk away from this guy sooner rather than later. That's why it's an important year for the Padres. That's why they have to be aggressive at the trade deadline, not just because they're selling out every single game, but they are, with the contracts, with the age of the contracts they have, they are in win mode right now. These contracts are not going to gauge any better, except maybe Manny Machado, man. Machado has been great. All right. You saw Keith Law's face when I showed him the Padres pitching matchup this weekend in Milwaukee. Randy Vasquez tonight, Steven Kolick, Ryan Berger. That's what the Padres are sitting out there. And then it's the Dodgers Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That should be a lot of fun. Hopefully we have an update by then on Michael King or Yu Darvish. We shall see. This is how you can watch the games. Okay, tonight, FanDuel and Padres TV. Tomorrow's on Fox. Sunday is on Roku. So I don't know. I'm sure you Padres fans will find a way to go ahead and find these games. All right, guys. Thank you for your time. I apologize for my Wi-Fi issues. I apologize for all the heavy banging in the background. Again, my apartment in PB has been an absolute disaster for going on nearly 2 weeks. There was a small mold issue in my room, which ended up with my closet ceiling being taken out, my bathroom ceiling, and walls being knocked down. So I apologize for all the banging in the background. Thanks, guys. We are brought to you again by the all-new Hamul Casino Resort, the Players Place. I'll talk to you on Monday. It's going to be a lot of fun. Dodgers, Padres, man. We've been waiting for it. Have a great weekend, and hopefully we get some sunshine. Bye.
Dylan, come here real quick. Come here.
What we got?
Hold on. If somebody said that we're getting our Avengers back by the injuries that are coming back,
Okay.
who would you compare Arias, Jason Hayward, and Jackson Merrill to in terms of an Avenger?
I've never really watched Avengers. To be
See,
honest
not a
with you.
nerd. He's a nerd in other ways.
I do play RuneScape sometimes. That's a little nerdy. And disc
But
golf.
you don't know.
I mean, I think it was just, we felt lonely out there. We missed our guys. And, we missed them in the clubhouse. They were gone for a whole week, and we just felt empty.